You've probably seen it or at least heard about it, a really passionate, raw monologue that's been making the rounds online, and it clearly struck a chord with a lot of people. Today, we're going to deconstruct it, break down its main themes, the arguments, and the raw emotion that's driving the whole thing. All right, let's get into it.
Right at the very heart of this entire speech is this one simple phrase, and he says it over and over. I've had enough. It's more than just a title. You can feel it's the emotional engine of the whole thing. It's a declaration that a line has been crossed.
So, what's that line? What's the breaking point all about? Well, the whole monologue really circles around one central grievance, and that's where we'll start. This really profound feeling of being pushed out of your own country.
The way the speaker frames it, his frustration comes from feeling like a stranger in his own home. He makes the case that his identity, his very right to belong, what he calls his homeland and his birthright, is constantly being questioned and undermined.
And this quote, wow, it just cuts right to the chase, doesn't it? The whole argument is built on history and ancestry. He's drawing a line between those whose families cultivated this land and others who, from his point of view, are now turning around and questioning his place here. It's just a really powerful statement about feeling alienated.
And that feeling of being pushed aside leads directly into the next big theme, a sense that the whole national culture is changing right down to the way people talk to each other every day.
He talks about this deep sense of loss for what he calls the great Aussie larrikin spirit. And this isn't just him being nostalgic. He's mourning a specific kind of informal, kind of cheeky, resilient national character that he feels used to be everywhere. At the shops, on the bus, everywhere.
And what's so interesting is how specific he gets. He doesn't just talk about some vague spirit. No, he lists the actual words and phrases he doesn't hear anymore. Things like she'll be right or no wuckins. For him, these are like little cultural artifacts, symbols of a time that felt more free, more real, and now it's gone.
And here's where it all connects back to today. That old freedom, symbolized by all that casual slang, is put right up against a present where he feels like he has to walk on eggshells, to choose his words ever so carefully so he doesn't offend anyone.
Okay, so from that feeling of being culturally and personally shut down, the monologue then pivots, and it takes sharp aim at the institutions he believes are causing all these changes.
So who's in the crosshairs? Well, he points the finger at a few key pillars of society. The biggest target, by far, is the education system. Then comes the media, especially the national broadcaster. And after that, he goes after cultural spaces. Think museums, art galleries, even bookstores. And when he talks about education, the language he uses is incredibly strong. He's not just suggesting the curriculum has changed a little bit. He's claiming there's a deliberate process of indoctrination going on with what he calls poisonous, toxic Marxist teachings. The goal, in his view? To make young people actually hate their own country's history and culture.
The media, and the ABC in particular, is another huge target. The accusation here is that the national broadcaster isn't neutral at all. He sees it as a media empire that's hostile to his values, staffed by people who, in his words, despise everything I stand for.
And this takedown of institutions, well, it feeds right into the next huge theme, this deep anxiety he has around national identity, multiculturalism, and what it even means to belong anymore.
This question, which he asks directly in the monologue, really gets to the absolute heart of his problem with modern multiculturalism. He doesn't see it as something being added to the culture. He sees it as a replacement, one that forces people to give up the things they've always loved.
This slide really breaks down the trade-offs he feels have been forced on everyone. On one side, you have what he believes has been lost, the freedom to speak your mind, neighborhoods that feel familiar, a distinct Aussie culture. And on the other side, what he thinks we got instead, a kind of forced social cohesion, feeling menaced and a stranger, and being told you have to respect foreign values that he just doesn't connect with. He also gets really specific with his complaints about immigration policy. He claims new arrivals get housed and put on welfare immediately, all paid for by the taxpayer. He argues that people from what he calls the worst places on earth get priority, while at the same time it's become almost impossible for people from culturally similar places in the Anglosphere to move here.
All right, so this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. This is where all those cultural anxieties get tied to very real, tangible complaints about money, government spending, and political priorities.
So a huge part of this is the feeling that his tax money is just being thrown away. In his eyes, the process is simple.
Regular people work hard and pay their taxes, the government takes that money, and then it gets squandered on things he sees as totally pointless or ideological, like bike lanes, modern art, and climate policies.
And the main targets for this wasted money are pretty clear. Right at the top, receiving most of his anger is what he calls the idiotic cult of climate extremism. Then he again points to the ABC and government grants for modern artists, who he argues just create ugly propaganda instead of real art.
So after all that, what's the big takeaway? At the end of the day, his grand conclusion is that the country is just rotting from the inside out with hypocrisy, humbug, and maybe worst of all, a kind of cultural self-hatred, a deep-seated shame for its own history and identity. And in the final moments, he names the culprit. He blames one specific group for everything. The monologue wraps up by pointing to the institutional forces of the rabid left as the ones who have deliberately destroyed what was once so beautiful.
So if you strip away all the fiery language, what you're left with is this long list of anxieties. Anxieties about fast-paced social change, about losing your identity, and a real feeling of powerlessness. So I guess the big question it leaves us with is this. No matter what your politics are, what is the fact that this message resonates so strongly with so many people tell us about the fears and frustrations that are simmering just below the surface today?